So, where do we start with marriage? Interestingly, what we're going to start with is obviously what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about marriage. And this is often one of the most commonly quoted verses that you'll see at a marriage ceremony. This verse will often be quoted in before the contracts are signed, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. So, O mankind, or O people, Allah's addressing everybody here, have awareness, be mindful of your Lord, your nurturer, your sustainer. These are the nuances of this word. Who He specifically has created you from a single soul. And then created from it its zawj. And zawj in Arabic means one of a pair. It's because we have two words for marriage in there's more than that, but the most common words for marriage in the Quran in Arabic are zawaj and, what's the other one? Nikah. Okay? And zawaj comes from zay, waw, jim, which means a pairing between two people. So there is this understanding that there is another side of us that we are looking to complete. Just like we've got two socks or two pairs of shoes, that the marriage is about two people coming together to complete one another. And then nikah, the scholars mention, is just linguistically meaning sexual relations. So it's a contract that makes sexual relations permissible between two people. Doesn't sound very romantic, does it? And we will talk about that. I think it's an interesting topic, that. So anyway, going back to the verse, وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا, and from them he spread out, he scattered, he sent out many men and many women, i.e. their progeny. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ, another version, تَسَاءَلُونَ, and have mindfulness of God, who you ask bihi wal arham, and be mindful of the family relations, the arham. So this is quite confusing sometimes on the ear, this passage in the Quran, because it can imply two things, or maybe even more. Is that be mindful of God, who you ask through Him. The scholars mention, some of them say that you use God in your oaths and in your contracts, so people take you seriously. So he's saying, be careful with that. You know, whenever we have a relationship, whether it be a financial relationship, whether it be a marital relationship, we're doing it through God. And because by doing that, we gain people's trust. You know, if you think someone in a business transaction, they swear by Allah that this is the best thing on the market, or this is the cheapest price you'll get, you're assuming that he's speaking, well, I don't know these days, but you're assuming that he's telling the truth because he's using God's name. And so you take his word for it usually. And so we use God's name in traditional Muslim cultures. It's used very much to impress upon people that you should take me seriously and I'm being genuine in what I have to say. So he says, be mindful of the way you use God in your relationships with one another, and be mindful of your family relations. So there's very much this common theme throughout the Quran about your relationship with God and your relationship with your family, specifically mother and father. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, verily, without a doubt, God is upon you a overseer. He's watching your actions. So in the way you engage with one another, one of the saving graces of making sure people behave themselves is to think there's a higher power, a higher authority watching over you. So be cautious of the way that you treat one another, because it comes back on us if we treat people with unjustly. So that's one of the most common verses of the Quran. And what's so interesting about this is that basically marriage, the conjoining of two people, is the means by which society is established, by which we have life. And so in that sense, marriage is something very, very precious. And it's very much to be protected. And most traditional societies, they impress the importance of marriage in society, whereas I feel that in this day and age, especially in Western societies, that doesn't seem so obvious why marriage is so important. Because fundamentally, we have compressed or condensed marriage down to about how, my relationship with this woman or my relationship with this man. That's what it's all about, how I feel towards this person and I want to live my life. But marriage is not just that. And this is why I was at Leeds Met just beforehand, and a gentleman asked me, he says, why in Islam the common question, why is it a Muslim man can marry a Jew or Christian, but a Muslim woman can't? And it's often because our focus, to understand and be able to answer these questions, we have to realize that marriage and a relationship is not just about two people. It's about two families come together. It's about society. It's about the well-being of the next generation as well. There's all these factors in place. So it's survival, really. The way that we look at marriage and the way that we respect marriage is very much about surviving and moving into the next generation so that they have the best opportunities possible. It's not just about two people wanting to, that they love one another and affection for one another. Although that's definitely an aspect of the marriage, we can't simply confine it to that. And that's really, really important that's how most traditional societies looked at marriage. Whereas our view of marriage today, and we can't help but be influenced by it, whether we be from more, immigrant backgrounds that have a very different view, we're still influenced by it because we're in this society. The next verse, have I done it right? Oh, my neck does not stretch right now. Yeah, I've got it, yeah. So, what's the next one? Oh, yeah. So, the next one's a really interesting verse, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. He's the one who created you from a single soul. وَجَعَلَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. And He appointed from that its partner. What's really interesting about this verse is, that you can't get from the translation, is there's a linguistic play on the word nafs and zawj. Because nafs in Arabic, which means a soul, is feminine in Arabic. In English we don't really have this concept of masculine and feminine. You have it more in French and other European languages. And zawj means one of a pair, so it can refer to the male or the female. But it's masculine, inherently, the word. So there's this play, because later on in the verse, where Allah says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. He's the one who created you from a single soul, and then appointed from it its mate, that He might now. This is the part where you can't really translate it. You'll probably be better to translate it as that they, to create some ambiguity about who it is. That they might find rest in her or them. Because there's a play, it flips the gender again, so you don't know, is it referring to the nafs, eye of the man, or is it referring to the zawj, who's the female, that's masculine? Do you see the play there? If you know Arabic, you probably can appreciate that play. That it's ambiguous, that there's an ambiguity about who finds rest in who, which is very, very interesting, because the reality is both of us, we find rest in one another. But there's another play here linguistically that's really important, because in the next verse it's going to clarify what's the purpose of marriage, or one of the main principles of marriage, is this concept of sukoon. Sukoon in Arabic comes from sin, kaf, noon, which means to rest, like repose, to find, like we say, ana askunu fi medinati Leeds, for example. I live in Leeds, it means I reside here. Reside's probably a better translation, because you find rest there, you settle there. But what's so strange here is you usually find rest in something, but the Arabic doesn't say that. It says you find rest towards something. I.e., when a male or a female, they engage with one another, there's this sort of attraction towards one another with this inherent notion and understanding that I will find relief and relaxation in that other person. So there's this play on those words. So that's really one of the fundamental things, that we, as human beings, deep within us, have a biological need to connect to another in order for us to... Now, I'm very hesitant and cautious around this word, because it doesn't mean that you're completed through that person necessarily, because the nuances of that might mean that you're an incomplete person if you're not married, which doesn't feel so good, does it? So it doesn't necessarily mean that, but it's definitely a means to grow and learn more about yourself. Because there's, in all traditional religions and cultures, they had this concept, didn't they, between the two sides, the dualistic nature of creation, in that you have the yin and the yang. You have in the Arabic concept of Jamal and Jalal, beauty and majesty, contraction, expansion. You have these two sides, and we have to, maturity, this is one of my favourite quotes, is that maturity is the ability to hold two opposites, two polars, in one space and be okay with that. That's maturity. So a simple example of that is that when mummy, like the little kid says, when mummy's angry with me, that must mean she doesn't love me. She can't sort of integrate those two sides. If you're shouting at me, you must hate me. If you're showing me love and appreciation, you must love. That's love. But reality, as an adult, we grow up and we realise that those two things can be harmonised. So they're not opposed to one another. They're actually they're there for one. They inherently they complement one another, and that's life. It's like, and we live in a very polarised society, where you're either with me or you're against me. I don't know if George Bush started it, but you know, it's very much permeated our society now. You're either in my camp or you're not. This polarisation that will destroy marriages and any relationship, because it's not just about me, it's about how do we understand these two sides of the coin, and how can we have actually a healthy, open conversation, even if I disagree, to explore it and be curious about it. That's so lacking in discourse, and that's why I hate debates, because debating is about defeating. We want open conversations to say, okay, let's explore and have a conversation about this, even if we may feel completely opposite on the spectrum. Let's hold this, and if we can't do that, we're going to struggle in marriage, because marriage is all about that. Why? Because fundamentally, when we go into a marriage, it's about I need something from you, and you need something from me. And sometimes what I need from you is not what I want to give you. And so we've got to negotiate that. And can we negotiate it, or it can be, that's it. You're just going to suck it up, buttercup, and if you want to stay with me, that's how it is. That's a sign of a toxic relationship, because there's no sort of empathy in order to understand how we as a team, how we as partners can sort this issue out. And that's what we're looking for in a partner that can do that. So, that's that slide. So this idea of sukoon, of that I'll come back to that afterwards, inshallah. The next one, the most famous one in Surah Al-Rum, is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, 21. So, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. And from amongst His signs is that He created for you from your very own selves. This is really important, because this is about empathy, is that we know that this person is from us. And so this is a common question that you have to ask yourself. Would you like to be spoken to like that? How would you be if you're in a vulnerable situation and felt really uncomfortable, and the other person, and you were being forced into a situation like that? That's a mindset that someone has to develop when they're in a relationship with anyone. I'm not just talking about marriage, I'm talking about in many, many circumstances, at work, with children, with parents, how parents deal with children, and vice versa. Again, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, to find repose towards her. Or is it the soul? Is it the soul, or is it the woman? That's the play here. And then this is really important. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ. Some of the scholars meant ja'ala here, which usually translates an appointed or made, but some of the scholars mean here farada, that He's made obligatory. Some of the scholars have, which is an interesting interpretation. And He has made, appointed or made obligatory between you. So He's brought the between forward in the verse here to stress between you. What should there be? Mawadda. Now mawadda, first of all, Allah uses the indefinite here, which means wondrous. It's not defined. It's like something like, so when I say to you, for example, what a goal. That was a goal. Like, you're not defining it, are you? It's a hyperbolic statement to say, like, I can't even describe what that's like. So Allah uses mawadda here. Mawadda is a very interesting word. It's usually translated as love or affection. It's got a different nuance to that. Mawadda is that you want to appease that person. You want to do it for them. So you love to do it because it makes you feel like it's sort of empathic, like I know it makes you happy, even if I don't like hoovering, I don't like washing up, but I know it makes you happy, or vice versa. That's the reciprocity in the relationship, is that, probably I wouldn't want to do it, but I do it because I really like to make you happy. That's one of the ingredients of marriage. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً, then rahma. Rahma is usually translated as mercy, no problem mercy, but I have a little bit of an issue of mercy, because sometimes mercy can mean I'll be merciful to you and let you off. It's always about some repercussion. And it doesn't mean that, rahma. Rahma can translate probably, it's mercy, but also compassion and empathy. It's got those nuances as well, because it's a word that comes from this root is like the rahim, the womb of the mother around the child. And so it's that sort of compassion and empathy and wishing to connect. So these are the qualities of a successful marriage. Mawaddat rahma, inna fi dhalika laayatin. These are wondrous signs, unimaginable signs. He uses the indefinite again, Allah in the verse, for a people who truly put things together. Yatafakkarun, to think means you put two things together. For example, life is contingent. It starts and then it ends. So therefore, there must be something that's keeping this alive that's not contingent. These are typical arguments in theology. So you're taking two things together. This is like this and this is like this. So this must equal that. That's what tafakkur means. You're really contemplating on different things and trying to find relationships and associations to come to some sort of conclusion and result around it. So that's, again, what's very much required in the relationship, in the marriage, is to contemplate and reflect over things. And then this is a famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and this is often quoted, this hadith in marriage contracts, where the Prophet ﷺ says, I think I've got it there, and I have the most awe and fear of God from among you. So the context of this hadith is there's some young guys in the community that thought the Prophet ﷺ, he's favoured by God and he can relax. As for us, we've got to do more work. So he says, I'm going to fast every day. I'm not going to sleep all night and I'm going to worship God. I'm never going to marry women. They started making these sorts of promises to themselves. And then the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessings be upon him, heard them, and he came out and he said, I have the most awe and fear of God from among you, but some days I fast and other days I do not. And I pray sometimes and sometimes I rest. And also I marry. So whoever is adverse to my practice, then they're not one of us. I.e., he's saying, look, this is not my way, and if you go another way, you'll go astray. This is how I am. So this brings us to an interesting point when it comes to marriage, is, do I have to get married, and why is marriage important? As I said already, that I feel that one of the most important things about marriage is it's from an Islamic understanding, it's the fabric of society, and most traditional communities looked at marriage like that. That's why it's important. And also, it's a means to, I believe that when someone starts to think about marriage, it's not really about marriage. It's about wanting to explore themselves and understand themselves. That's one of the underlying things. And if someone can have that as a prerequisite before marriage, like this, whether I get married or not, this is a journey about really discovering myself. Because then when you go into the marriage, you're far more prepared to face the challenges that are often there in a marriage. And so first and foremost, it's an intention that I'm going to want to complete myself. We never complete ourselves, but we are working towards some sort of wholesomeness. That's one of the intentions. And I say that to many women particularly women come to me in the counselling and therapy I do. And they are 30 or 40 and they're not married. And they're like, my biological clock is ticking, or whatever they feel. And they're worried, I want to get married. And I say, that's beautiful, it's something that's very much important, but don't make that the be and end all. Because your life is not, your happiness and your fulfillment in life and your potential is not restricted just to being married. Society and our families and community may make us feel like that, and we'd all love to, we'd love to find someone that we can settle down with, but it may not happen. And is that all our happiness and joy in life and fulfillment going to be just based around that? I don't think that's a very healthy mindset. So I believe, from my own experience and the experience of others, is that when you start to explore and broaden your horizons and connect to things you want to, you start to connect with people that may be suitable for you. And that's a much healthier model than this desperate, oh my God, I've got to get married, because you should never get married in desperation. You're always going to get very, very a shock of your life if you jump into something like that. So this hadith is often quoted to say that it's obligatory to get married. But I question that to some degrees, because it's important for us to understand context here. The context is the Prophet ﷺ saying, look guys, sort yourselves out. Stop, you're not some monks, some celibate monks. Marriage is something very much of my life. And if you want, if you're desirous of other than that, then that's not my way. So, but the scholars did speak about this, and there's a range of difference of opinion about this matter. The majority of scholars said it's a sunnah to get married. It's something that's highly recommended in our lives, but it's not something that's necessary. I know your parents may make you feel, some parents, that they can't get into paradise until you get married. It's like, I'm not dying until you get married, then I can die. And they make you feel so guilty that you say, okay, where's my cousin? I'll marry him then, just so you can die happily. And that's called blackmail, emotional blackmail. That's not considered the way of how we're supposed to approach marriage Islamically. So the scholars say it's highly stressed. It's something that we should sort of aspire to achieve in our lives. It's one of the things in our lives, but it's not the be and end all. What's interesting is some of the scholars say where it becomes haram for you to get married, and they say where you feel like you won't be able to fulfill the rights of the person that you're bringing into your life, then it becomes actually disliked, forbidden. Another situation scholars often mention is that if you're going to put the person in great difficulty financially, and all sorts of things that will basically put the other person out, then it becomes disliked or reprehensible for you to marry if you're in those circumstances. And then what I often hear from some religious scholars, which I have an issue with, is they say, well, I've got this desire in me, and I've got to get married. I say, God help that woman. It's that, come here, woman. I need to relieve my. So that's not if you feel like that, there are ways to deal with that. That will be not exclusive to marriage. One of them is stop eating so much meat. That's the first thing. They talk about that. They talk about, it's not just for the Prophet ﷺ, obviously gave advice to people who want to get married. They have this desire, they're struggling, and the advice is, obviously the Prophet ﷺ said this, is fasting. But we have to look at fasting also in a more holistic sense. Fasting means to, and I'm not denying that it means fasting, the traditions. But it also could mean, from a secondary meaning, it's abstinence, abstain from things. So things that sort of goad you, encourage those desires, and you're struggling. It's cutting out meat, cutting out dairy products, engaging in more healthy pursuits in your life, so that you can fulfill sort of that energy within you that you're struggling with. Because it's not always just sexual. Sometimes it's like you feel unfulfilled in your life. Like Jung had a very different perspective of the libido to Freud. Freud saw the libido as we look at it, as sexual. But Jung said, no, the libido is vital energy. And often that vital energy that you want to sort of engage your agency in the world, it's not just sexual, it's many, many other things. So what you might interpret as I've got sexual desire, I'm not denying it could be that, but it could also be that you're frustrated and unsatisfied in your life. And when you start achieving things in your life, it might quell the desire to some degree as well. So these are things. I'm really apprehensive around these quick fix advices that people give. It's never that simple, and it's very dangerous to give quick fixes to people because it often doesn't solve the problem. It gets them stuck in the cycle, and it becomes cathartic releasing, but not healing. Cathartic releasing is, the guy's angry with his colleague at work, so he goes to the gym and just starts punching bags and things like this. That's releasing, it's not healing, because you're not going to get out the cycle of your anger. And so it's important that we don't just look for cathartic short-term solutions to our struggles in life, but look deeper of what are these things, and what's underlying these struggles that we're having, and what do they call to. It's been said, now I find this interesting. So this comes to the point about our perspective of marriage. So I'm not trying to bash Christians here, but I think this is my understanding of why we are where we're at socially. Because in my understanding of Christianity, and I could be completely wrong, but this is how I understand it, is marriage is sacrosanct in the Christian faith. It's seen as actually a rite, a religious rite that's made sacred, hence why traditionally a Christian couldn't get married. I mean, this was even the case in England, I think I'm correct, is that you couldn't get married unless it was in a church before, because it had to be ordained by the priest. So marriage was something sacred, and that is why in Christian faith, traditionally, that divorce was completely forbidden, because you've conjoined in the name of God. To separate after that is to suggest that you basically cut the relationship with God as well, your spiritual relationship with God. There's only obviously two situations in Christian faith that you can separate, is if you are your partner has acted in infidelity, or the person dies. That's about it. And traditionally, it was very, very, very difficult to get divorced in England, because it was still following the Christian laws in this sense. And that's not how we look at things Islamically. Islamically, it sounds very unromantic, but the fundamentals of a marriage contract in Islam is, I want to have relationships, sexual relations with you. Now, it's not all this, but fundamentally, I want to have sexual relations with you, I want to have sexual relations with you. Well, we've got to do it by a contract, because we're entering into a partnership with one another. Just like any business partnership, I am committing to something, there has to be a contract that the community are a witness to, so that we know our responsibilities, because we wish to enjoy one another. Fundamentally, that's what I've got a marriage contract in Islam. It's got no religious, spiritual, like this, the Imam married us off and I did istikhara, my mum saw. So he must be the one. It's got nothing to do with that. We completely over-spiritualise marriage in Islam, in Muslim culture. I think we're more Christian than Christians sometimes in the way that we look at marriage. Fundamentally, it's, I think I could do life with you, we're attracted to one another, let's see if we can do it together. You live life together, doesn't work out. Okay, didn't work out. We have a divorce, then, now this is in traditional societies, I'm not saying this is the case here, in traditional societies, as soon as, and we've got to look at it in the context of that women were, in pre-modern societies, on the whole, did not work, and they were much more reliant on a family structure to be provided for. That was how it was back then. And so, as soon as a woman was divorced, it was seen as a social obligation for males, and this is more in Arab society, obviously it differs per culture, is that as soon as she's finished her waiting period of 3 menstrual cycles, a suitor would be there to say, I will marry you. Because he saw it as, not because he just wants to have sex with the woman, but he saw it as a social obligation that we don't have a national state to look after us. We have to be underneath a structure where we're being provided for. And so it was seen as a social obligation that we could, there for our women folk and our children folk, in order that they can provide it for and they're not left vulnerable. Fundamentally, that's how marriage is. It's a means for us to have sex in a lawful way. It's a means for us to have children, to have that sexual relationship also within confines and understandings of our roles and responsibilities for one another. And also that we can raise our children in a healthy way together. But remember, in traditional societies, that you divorced one another, it didn't mean the children didn't still have a social dynamic around them, because family structure was very, obviously, much stronger than we have. There was no nuclear families. You had aunties, you had uncles. So divorce would be far less traumatic for children than it is today often. And we have to understand that we can't remove our Islamic tradition from a social context. And I think this is one of my biggest gripes about our traditional way of learning is we don't learn social sciences, we don't learn to contextualise. And often most of the questions that people come to me with, they're like, how on earth do I understand this Islamic principle or law in the context of today? And marriage is one of the greatest witnesses to that, is that some of the our laws, they seem very archaic or very, very out of line with modern sensitivities and sensibilities. And so we can't remove it from the social context it's in. And what I find so fascinating is, especially in the States, because in the States, communities are far more spread apart, aren't they? America being so large. In England, it's still quite tight-knit, is that there's this sense of that we have to build communities. So you'll see people, because they sense that the state is getting weaker and weaker and less able to support people, they start to build up sort of micro-communities. And this is partly why, controversial topic, why the polyamorous communities are coming out now. If anyone's familiar with polyamory communities, it's really interesting the way they deal with things, because they're realizing that marriage is not just about the feelings towards one another. It's financial responsibilities and many, many, many factors. Marriage is not just limited to that. Hence why you'll see that people like, is it Will Smith? I don't know what his wife's name is. What's her name? Huh? Jada. I think now, what I heard, so you corroborate, they have a very loose relationship. They can basically see other people because they realise they've got children they're responsible. They realise they're financially very wealthy with one another. So they're not going to divorce because they've got a lot to lose. They realise that marriage is not just about how we feel with one another. There's many, many, many other aspects to the marriage. And so they made terms and agreement. I'm not saying it's right or wrong here, but I'm just saying they're being very practical of we can see other people. So I find it very interesting now in society that people are starting to even think like this on much more practical terms than thinking like marriage should complete me spiritually, and this person should fulfill my every need. If that person doesn't understand me, then he can't be my soulmate, or she can't be my soulmate. All this lulu la la land stuff. That's Islam. That's the ideal. What I find beautiful about Christianity is it sort of points to an ideal, but Islam says, yeah, that's lovely, we'd like that, but the reality is we've got some bare knuckle nuts and bolts reality we want to deal with, mate. And that's how Islam's very practical in the way it deals with these situations, and it has to conform to the circumstances in which we're actually living as well. We always have to bring it back to that. So, where are we? Have we finished that one? Yeah. So let me just make sure I've covered all the points on why marriage is important. So the other thing, I think one of the major struggles we're having about marriage in general is that traditionally people got married again for many reasons. They were fine. Look at the Prophet ﷺ, he describes this. He says that the woman's married for 4 things, if you're familiar with the famous hadith: for her wealth, for her beauty, for her lineage, and for her religion. And that's for men as well. And notice beauty is not mentioned first. It's actually mentioned, other things are mentioned first. Like her wealth is mentioned first, which is interesting, because that was actually something very important in traditional societies, is financial stability. And you'll find that in the third world in Morocco. I lived in Morocco for about 8 years. I remember a friend of mine, his daughter was going to marry a Westerner, and I said to her, are you sure you want to go through this? Do you love him? And she's like looking at me as if I'm a dafty. Like, by marrying this person, I'm going to bring more financial prosperity to my family. That's how other cultures look at things. Because it's not just about attraction, it's not just about whether I feel my emotional needs are going to be fulfilled. Some people, it's just practical things. There's greater opportunities for not just for my family, but also my children, if we potentially have children. So that, in traditional cultures, that was numero uno for most people, was financial stability, because we didn't have the affluence that we have today. And so we take that for granted. Now, women don't have to marry for money. They're out in the working place, and they can get, if it's about money, forget that. It's probably going to try to run away with me money. Next one, we say, what else? Marry for lineage. Now that's pretty much, unless you're in the higher crusts of society, that's not that relevant now. If it's royal families and so forth, that might be relevant. But for most of us, lineage is not as important, who the family belongs to. And it becomes less relevant in individualistic societies, because just because they come from that person, that individual comes from a good family, does not mean necessarily they are good. Whilst I think, my assumption is, in traditional cultures, you could make a good assumption that that person would be a good person. It's not the case now. And, you know, even babies, if we would talk about babies, a woman doesn't even need a man for a baby anymore. She just goes to a sperm bank and gets a kid, and there you go. Okay. So what on earth, why does she want to put herself through this torturous ordeal of marrying a guy that might just completely ruin her life? And I think the one last ingredient that's lacking, that a woman or a man, I'm not just talking about women, men need, but I think women, you know, that's my assumption, excuse my generalisation, is that women want emotional intimacy with a man. And they crave that. The bad news is we ain't so good at that. Because men, we're still very much in our mindset of our role, it's hard to get out of our system, is that our main role, for many of us, is to work, isn't it, and bring money home and provide for the family. You know, many men, and even myself, it's very easy to fall into that and just be Mr. Do things, you know, acts of service, Mr. Acts of Service. But when she says to him, oh, please can't you just stop going out with your mates, or stop doing overtime, can't you just sit in this evening and just, can we stare in one another's eyes for 20 minutes, you know? Or can we just have some quality time? And he's like, what? That comes very difficult for some people, and it's more particular to men, but obviously it's not specific to them, is that I believe that that's the biggest wrestling point in many relationships, is that one of the parties just can't give quality time to them. And it's a real struggle, and that's actually, for many women when they get married, that is what they want, and it's what we really struggle with, and that's where a lot of tension happens in relationships, and so it's something you have to work on, very much so. Next one we're on is how do I get married and what should I be looking for? Usually people come to me when they're already married and they're not happy. That's the situation I deal with most of the case. And I'm always curious about finding these 6 points of glue in the relationship. If they're there, then I can probably help you. If not, I'll still try, but God help you. Number 1, you have the biological desire for sex. Sounds pretty straightforward, but many people get married and they don't even have sexual desire. Now you're saying, oh, that's so oof. He says, I just want to have a partner that I can live life and just get a friend. Because, you know, get a dog, if you can't, or get a cat, or whatever. You know, so, yes, that's lovely, and I'm not dismissing that's an important thing in the relationship, but it shouldn't be why you get married just that. Because there will be, and I've had situations where, I had one situation, it was really strange, is that he was a GP as well, and he was really squeamish, and he didn't want to have sex with his wife. And I was dealing with it, and she literally was like, oh, give me sex. And he was like, get off me. It was a really weird relationship, and usually it's the other way around. And I just sat with him, and I was like, you know, what's going on? And what was interesting was, I knew deep down he wasn't really ready for marriage. And when he was a very intelligent guy, he was a GP, and he went to actually Muslim counsellors, and they all gave him advice and said, just go for it. And I was like, that is the worst advice you ever give to someone when they're saying, I don't think my heart's in it. And he felt the pressure of his family, and he just went ahead with it and said, maybe it'll work out. And he wasn't really prepared for it. And I said to him, my God, because then there was a shame of like him initiating the divorce. This comes up very often in Muslim cultures, is that the man literally won't give her a divorce because he doesn't want to be made out that he's the bad guy, because it makes him feel like he's the bad guy and the community might judge him. So he couldn't even do that. So I literally have to hold his hand to do the divorce because I knew the relationship wouldn't work. But I said to him, look, for God's sake, you're a GP. You can't sort out your private life. And he said something very profound. He said, when I went to medical school, I was there for 6 years, and I had mentors that took me through the whole process. No one ever prepared me for marriage, and I think he had a fair point. It's like, who prepares us for marriage? Because, you know, we basically just think it should all just fit like a sock or a pair of pants. And it's not like that. It's you know, often, but what do we need to be put in place? And these are the things I think is really important. The person has sexual desire, because that's a sign from God that you're ready now to start preparing for marriage. You say, well, I felt like I wanted sex when I was 12 years old. But you say, well, that's a good sign of now get financially stable. You go get a job, so maybe when you're 20 or 18 or 19, 20, you can actually get ready for marriage. You know, do our parents think like that? You know, putter, ooh, you start, you know, mum, what are you doing, putter? You know, I'm starting to feel the urge, mum. Okay, right, putter, we're going to prepare you now. So, next one, the next one is you take agency in the process. I get really worried, and this happened once to me. I phoned this guy and I said, are you sure you want to marry her? He says, as long as me mum and my sister's happy. And I went, oh my God. He doesn't want to get married. He just wants a slave in the house to look after his mum and his sister. And so I want to hear from them that they're showing agency in the process. They really, you know, they're grilling the other potential to find out are they going to basically be compatible with one another. They're going out of their way to meet up and so forth. They're not just saying, you know, fobbing it off and saying I'm happy whatever you're happy with. You know, that I'm really scared of when people start saying things like that in the premarital stages. You're attracted to the person. The Prophet ﷺ highly encouraged this. Unfortunately, in a lot of traditional cultural Muslim cultures, guess what? You didn't see her until the wedding night. This isn't just exclusive to Muslim cultures, it's actually other cultures, but that's a scary way to get married to somebody. And so, even in the Prophet ﷺ's time, he encouraged, people went round and started, I mean, it could get a bit pervy, but they started looking round and saying, oh, I like her. And the Prophet ﷺ encouraged that, have you seen the woman, for God's sake? Are you attracted to her? So both, for the husband and the wife, it's important, they have attraction. What do I mean by attraction? I don't mean you drop your jaw and you start howling at the moon when you see the person. I mean you just feel that, ooh, you know, something's here, you know, and that could be not necessarily just physical, but it could be just like, oh, you know, in the conversations you have, ooh, you know, that I'm looking for. That's the juice that's going to make this worth fighting for. Next one. Can I get some water, please, if there is some water around? I get a dry mouth when I'm put on stage. You do not get any unnecessary surprises that you are not expecting. So I have this massive, exhaustive list that you're not supposed to go through fully. It's basically from finances to in the bedroom to everything. What I ask people to do is, if they've got a potential person they're speaking to, I say, go through the list by yourself and look for deal breakers. Like, if I don't get that will break the deal for me. And make sure you get those things discussed in the preliminary stages, so you don't get any fears. Like, the funniest one I ever heard was, the woman didn't realise that the husband was bald. That was hilarious. Like, and she couldn't get over that after the marriage. She was like, he's got a toupee, it fell off in the morning. And she was really struggling. And that's forbidden Islamically for you to do that. That's what we call in taghrir, you're deceiving the person. You know, I don't know if you ever saw that famous one, the woman dolled herself up to the max. She always wore loads of makeup. So, and she painted out that she was completely like white, you know, pure, like. And then on the wedding, in the morning, her makeup came off and she was really dark, and he was like, oh my God, you know, that's not what he expected to marry. Now, you say, that's so cruel. But what I'm saying is, you need to know what you're getting yourself into. So if someone comes to me and says, this is important to me if I get married to someone, then it's important to you. Like, because you've got to be able to see this relationship through. So for some people, it might be really important that they marry a virgin, for example. It might be very important they marry someone with blue eyes. Oh, that's another funny story. There was a Pakistani doctor I knew. He was looking for this, like, the perfect girl, and he'd been everywhere on the planet to find her. He went to Chechnya, and like, he wasn't even that good looking, but he wanted this stunning, blonde, blue-eyed, gorgeous, righteous, wealthy Muslim girl. And he'd been everywhere on the planet. So after a while, I think people at different parts of the world were saying, is it that guy? You know? So that's a bit crazy. Where was I? What were we talking about? Yeah, don't get any surprises. So it's really important, and I've got my email at the end, I can send out that list. There's some intimate stuff in there, and you don't have to discuss that if it's not important to you. So, but if something's a deal breaker, make sure you discuss it. And then people say to me, well, it might, if I discuss that, if I bring up like finances, for example, that's a common one. If I bring up finances, then they might get uncomfortable. That's exactly what you want to see. You want to rock the boat before the marriage, not in a provoking way, like can I get them annoyed to find out what they're really about. But if it's important to you, like how much do you earn? It's important. Like are you transparent with finances? For some person that might be important. And the person says, mind your own business. Now you say, probably couldn't get married to that person. Because that person's not willing to sort of meet you halfway and discuss it. They're just saying, none of your business, don't want to discuss it, and so forth. These are little, so you really want to see where people get really defensive, because then you want to see, can you actually have a discussion, stating to them, this is really important for me, and I really need to go, this is peace of mind, because this is a need for me in the relationship. And if they start averting, like I'll tell you in 3 weeks' time when my next bank statement comes out, oh come on, it's not a big issue, stop. That's a big red flag. Like this is probably not someone you can do life with if they're going to be evasive like that with something that's important to you. So next one, the responsibilities of marriage. There's a basic book, it's nice, it's not obviously, it's just, but I feel a lot of people are just really oblivious when they go into a relationship. It's called I think it's called something like What I Wish I Knew Before I Got Married, by Gary Chapman. And Gary Chapman's famous, if anyone's done the love languages. Has anyone done the love languages? That's a real useful tool in life. It's very simplistic, but it's very useful. So I'll go through it quickly. Love languages. The idea in life is that all of us, I've got 5 minutes I think, all of us have a way that we want our needs to be met, and it's like fuel for our heart. If we don't get it, we don't feel like we're being loved. And this isn't exclusive to wives and husbands, this works across the board. So, if I need to receive this to feel like I'm like content and feel loved and connected. Number one, does anyone know the first one?
Quality time?
That's one of them, well done. Yeah. The typical first one that's the hardest one, so don't go there. The first one is words of affirmation. So some people, they need, it's like me, I put out the bin and I run to my wife and I've been a good boy. That's what I'm like. My wife says, why on earth, I cook your dinner, I don't say, have I done good? And I say, well, this is me, I need to know, I'm a bit insecure, I need to be told I'm a good boy and you love me. Okay, so some people, that's important. Oh, you're my hero, you bring food back, you bring money home and you provide for us. And I'm like, yeah, I'm loved. That's words of affirmation. How do you know what your love language is? It's the language that you give in. So if you notice someone just compliments other people, that means that's what they want. And the other thing is, it's the language they complain in. And this is the big mistake in marriages people make, is they feel they have to justify themselves when someone offers something up. That's the worst way you can solve a situation. So if the wife says to me, you don't say anything nice to me, you never praise, you never say how good I look, and then this is the worst thing a husband can ever do. That's not true. Last week I did the how to alienate the person. What they're really saying, we have to translate, a translator comes in, to the room. She's subtitles underneath. She's saying, could you please say that I'm looking very nice now? Okay, that's a massive, I see that issue in the relationship. And if you know this skill, if you know the love languages, often it's like Wing Chun. It's like you defend to assert yourself in the combat. It's like, you can have 5 hours, my friend, justifying that you do compliment your wife and be miserable and go to bed with a headache, or you can just simply meet her love need and say, you look gorgeous, pet. Okay. Solved. That's number one. Number two, acts of service. You like things done for you, okay? And you like to do things for others. So if you say, you never help me around the house, she's saying, can you help me around the house? That's not true. I did. No. Okay, what do you want done? What can I do? You should know. That's the stupidest answer I've ever heard. Women use that one as a weapon, I think. It's like, I shouldn't have to tell you, and you should know. Well, I teach Arabic, and I'm having to repeat myself many times as a teacher to get a point. So I always tell the husbands, never let your wife use that as a weapon against you, that you shouldn't have to repeat myself. If you love me, I shouldn't have to repeat myself. That's a lie. 2 areas we lose our common sense: relationships and religion. We just live in la la land. Would you go, my boss, if he really loves me, I wouldn't have to tell him I want a pay rise. You should see it in my eyes. How daft. If you want something, ask for it. And you might need to remind the person. So, acts of service. Number 3, quality time. I find men generally, it's a huge generalisation, it's true for me, acts of service and words of affirmation. You hit those 2, he thinks he's the marriage is he's flying. He's like, what a wonderful wife, she's going to paradise. For women though, often, and it's a generalisation, is that I feel quality time's a big one, and that is basically you spend time with them, and unadulterated time. Sitting in a cinema might be considered as quality time, but for a lot of women, or men even, it's not, because you're looking at a screen and not looking at one another, and you're not connecting and relating to one another. It's about relating to one another. Quality time, next one, physical touch. So they like to have touch. It could be massages, it could be just a hand round, it could be a high five, but they need to have some physical touch. And the last one is receiving gifts. So often in a relationship, the problem is we think the person that we are in a relationship with wants to receive what we want to receive. So there was a typical example where a man wrote poetry to his wife. Oh, what a lucky woman. And she just yeah, well, whatever. Because she wasn't words of affirmation. She was acts of service. Stop writing your poetry and help me around the house, you loser. And he thought, what an ungrateful wench. Because he was words of affirmation, so he thought she should accept that. But that's not her love language. So can you see where the confusion comes in? So you need to understand how the other person likes to receive things. We didn't write them. Now, this is the last one. You have flexibility. You know the responsibilities of marriage. You have the flexibility to deal with conflicts and challenges. So you're willing to negotiate. It's not just this is the killer. We agree to disagree. That just means I'm not going to listen to you. That's not a way of solving a conflict. It's okay, how can I meet this need I know it's important to you. Now, are we compatible? It's interesting. Compatibility actually means to struggle together. Isn't that interesting? Compati in Latin, I think, means to actually suffer together. Not that you suffer, you suffer from him or her, but you suffer together in something. So you can do, and also some of the nuances are sympathy and pity as well. So compatibility doesn't mean that you're going to be in harmony with one another. It just means you've got the tools that you can do life together. So as they do happen in marriage, the goalposts are often shifted, is that you have the flexibility to say, right, we're a team here, because that's how marriage is in the modern day. We don't live in marriages before were marriages of survival, because it was institutionalized marriage more. Now we're in marriages of authenticity. I've got to feel real with myself. If I don't feel it, I don't want to be in it. And that's what we're dealing with. So we have to work with what we're dealing with. And the thing is that we have to know, are we willing to have that flexibility so we can come together as a team to solve things. And what I've got, we haven't got time to do it, it was a little game I was going to do if I was going to pick on someone in the class and see, find out their personality type, because there's another thing I use for people, is to find out their personality types, which is based on the 4 temperaments. Are you familiar with the 4 temperaments? I can send that to you if anyone wants to. I really think it's important that you understand who you are. These things, these typologies they call them, they're not conclusive, so we're not diagnosing people, we're just getting to understand ourselves better. I think it's important you understand what their general type is and what your general type is, and that can be done through this is one that I think is the best. There's the Myers-Briggs one, I'm not so convinced by that one. This one I think is a lot more fun and straightforward and practical, so I can send that to you if anyone's interested in that. That's things I offer to people when they're pre-marital, they want to do something, they want to go ahead with or possibly look into a potential. And that's the service I offer, plug now, is that I believe one of the things majorly lacking in our community is the sense of wilaya. Wilaya being a wali, and a wali in Arabic means a guardian that's got your back. That's literally what it means in Arabic. Someone who's got your back and is looking out for you. And I believe a lot of the time our parents don't have a clue in what we really need. And so I think it's an onus upon religious leaders who have been also skilled in counselling and therapy. That's something really lacking in our religious leaders, unfortunately, is that they take them through the process. Because then you find out whether the person's really legit. If you say to someone, you know, I'm interested in you, but I'd like you to meet Mr. Imam. And then they go, oh no, we don't need that. You know, if that's another litmus test to see whether, are you willing to allow a third party in and he's not going to say don't get married or do get married. They're just going to say, these are the issues, these are the things that have come up for me. These are the positives that have come up for me. Now you've got to make that decision between the two of you. And so I offer that service as well. And there's my email if anyone's interested. I believe more and more people in our community need to provide this service, like a wilaya service. And the women don't, generally, traditionally, it's about the woman because the woman's got more to lose in a relationship. But I believe even the men need this service, someone to support them through that process as well. And I think we're in there. Thank you very much, guys. Forgot to mention in the talk as well, I really do feel that when people go to university, this is again a generalisation, I only can talk in general terms, is that university is a real opportunity to find someone compatible. And women today, I think, is really detrimental if they just rely on their parents to find them someone. I'm not saying that's not an avenue or family to see, because if it doesn't work out, and it often doesn't, they're 30 to 35 years old, they've relied on their careers, they focused on their careers and sort of gave the responsibility to their brothers or family. They end up resentful because they're thinking, I relied on you to find me someone and you didn't. You can't, I mean, don't put yourself in that position. It's a I know it's easier said than done for some people, their circumstances. I think it's important to go out and find someone, whichever way that's possible. And one of the ways, I really don't like the traditional rishta process. I went through it, and I'm not saying to dismiss it, but it's tiring because two people are coming together, basically putting on a front to see if they want to marry one another. And it's just really awkward and impractical, and it can get very lengthy. I think the healthiest way to meet someone is that you just basically get out, socialise. I'm not saying go down the pub or go clubbing, but what I'm saying is you just socialise, interact, and just see someone how they are before even marriage is in the picture. And that's, you know, it's interesting. The Sahaba, some of them went to look for a woman and just said, I'm attracted to her. It's like he wasn't like suddenly springing her forward. He was like seeing how they're interacting. And that way you can actually feel, no, this person, I think it's someone I could do life with. And then you have the conversation because there's already the interest. I think the traditional ways sometimes, for our current context, is just really awkward. So we have to think outside the box. And I'm not dismissing any avenue, but I am saying it's important for us to expand our social circles, that in mind, and get out there in life and not live in being reclusive and introverted. You may struggle if you have that sort of attitude towards it.
أتيت بذنبي يا نور فؤادي وهل ترضى عني وقد فنى زادي